You can't even pronounce the name of the wine, said the millionaire with an arrogant smile on his lips. The waitress calmly looked at him, replied in French, and elegantly offered a toast. The entire room fell silent. That evening, it was he who felt ashamed. Support the channel by liking and commenting. Now, let's turn to our story. Mar Alta was not just a restaurant, but a true institution in the heart of Ipanema. With its elegant yet unpretentious interior, large windows overlooking the sea, and a wine list that drew admiration from connoisseurs, the establishment had become a meeting point for Rio de Janeiro's elite. On this Thursday, as on other evenings, Sofia Almeida deftly balanced trays of crystal glasses, like a ballerina. She was 25, with the tireless energy of someone pursuing a dream. Beneath her impeccable uniform of white shirt, black vest, and bow tie was a young woman who divided her time between working at the restaurant and attending gastronomy courses, which she paid for with great difficulty. The daughter of public school teachers, she understood from an early age that she had to forge her own path. Table 17, important clients seemed to be there, warned Julio, the maitre d', looking meaningfully at the man in the blue suit, Ricardo Lemos. Sophia slightly raised her gaze towards the indicated table. Even without a warning, she would have noticed this group. The entire restaurant seemed to revolve around that table, like a center of gravity. Mar Alta had shifted towards the window, and it was easy to understand why. Ricardo Lemos was the type of man who didn't need to try to attract attention. Tall, with broad shoulders perfectly outlined by a custom-tailored suit, casually styled brown hair, and a penetrating gaze, he was the embodiment of success. In his early 30s, he often appeared in business magazines as one of the country's most promising young entrepreneurs, owner of a hotel chain expanding throughout the region. If rumors were true, he had recently divorced. He usually brought international clients here. Be impeccable, Julio quietly added. Sophia nodded, adjusting her bow tie. Impeccability was her rule, no matter whom she served. She had learned this during her 2 years in France with her aunt, a Brazilian chef who had conquered Paris with her restaurant, Fouis. It was there, among pots and glasses, that Sophia discovered her passion for gastronomy and the world of wines. She approached the table with the posture Julio so admired. Back straight, steps confident but silent. She appeared only when necessary. 4 men were conversing animatedly in a mix of Portuguese and English. Besides Ricardo, there were 2 older men with American accents, and a young man, likely an assistant or translator. "Good evening, gentlemen," Sophia greeted with a professional smile. "Welcome to Mar Alta. May I offer you something to drink while you choose your dishes?" Ricardo looked at her intently, that same appraising gaze that powerful men often cast upon women in service positions. Not quite disrespectful, but imbued with a hierarchical awareness that quietly annoyed Sophia. "Still water for the table," he said. Then, after consulting glances with the others, "Let's start with a bottle of wine. Something that goes with the view, wouldn't you say, gentlemen?" The Americans smiled and vigorously agreed. Ricardo flipped through the wine list, examining it like a man searching not just for a drink, but for an expression of refinement. "Bring us a Chateau Margaux, 2010 vintage," he finally decided, pronouncing the name with an attempt at a French accent that betrayed his limited knowledge. Sophia maintained a neutral expression, though she immediately noticed that the choice wasn't quite suitable for a hot summer night in Rio, especially with what would likely be seafood dishes. A heavy red wine like Margaux was not the best option, but her job was not to argue, but to serve. "Excellent choice, sir. I'll be right back," she said, heading for the climate-controlled cellar. Sophia quickly calculated in her head. A bottle of Chateau Margaux 2010 was worth about 2 months of her salary. For some people, the world operated by completely different rules. Julio met her on the way. "What did they order, Chateau Margaux?" The maitre d' frowned. "Starting with that wine in this heat." Sophia shrugged. "The customer is always right. Isn't that what you always say?" Julio sighed. "All right, I'll prepare the bottle, go back to the table and take their orders. Maybe we can offer something that pairs better with the wine." When Sophia returned, the atmosphere at the table had changed. Ricardo was speaking louder, gesturing with the confidence of a man accustomed to attracting attention. "The secret is knowing what people really want, even before they realize it themselves," he was explaining to the Americans. "That's how we turned a bankrupt hotel in Buzios into the most exclusive resort on the Fluminense coast." Sophia waited for a pause in the conversation. "Gentlemen, have you decided what you would like for dinner?" "Not yet," Ricardo replied without looking at her, "but we can ask for the chef's recommendations to pair with the chosen wine." Of course, Chef Renato recommends the Dorado with herbs or the shrimp and lemon risotto. These are our restaurant's signature dishes. One of the Americans leaned forward, interested. Sounds excellent. How fresh is the fish? Sophia smiled and switched to English effortlessly. Our fish is caught daily by local fishermen and delivered to the kitchen every afternoon. The American looked pleased, but before he could respond, Ricardo interjected. Allow me to place all three orders, he said, taking control again. We'll have 4 appetizers to share. Burrata, carpaccio, fresh oysters. And he paused dramatically, as if making a momentous decision. Grilled shrimp. Sophia quickly wrote down the orders, aware of Ricardo's appraising gaze, which was now even more pronounced. The look of a man trying to figure out if she was just a beautiful waitress or something more. Julio approached with the selected wine and presented the bottle to Ricardo for approval. The ritual began. Presentation of the label, careful uncorking, the first taste offered to the host. Ricardo theatrically swirled the glass. Observing the droplets running down the crystal, took a deep breath and took a small sip. Excellent, he declared a moment later. You can pour for everyone. While Julio poured the wine for the other guests, Ricardo turned to Sophia, who was waiting for confirmation of the main courses. What about the main course? He continued, looking at the menu again. I think we'll have the Dorado you mentioned for our guests, and I'll try the fillet with red wine sauce. Sophia nodded, making notes. Excellent choice, sir. Would you like me to suggest side dishes as well? The chef prepares truffle mashed potatoes that pair wonderfully with the fillet. Ricardo looked at her with renewed interest. You seem to know a lot about food pairings. These are just the basics I've learned working here, Sophia replied diplomatically. One of the Americans, the eldest, raised his freshly poured glass. This wine is magnificent. I'm impressed that a Brazilian restaurant offers such superb French wines. Ricardo smiled, clearly pleased with the approval. Brazil's culinary scene is evolving rapidly. We're no longer just about caipirinhas and barbecues, he responded fluently in English. He turned to Sophia with a slight condescension. Chateau Margaux is one of the best Bordeaux wines there is. You probably can't even pronounce its name correctly, can you? The comment, made in Portuguese so that only she could hear it, caught Sophia off guard. Not because of the arrogance as she was used to clients who underestimated her, but because of the senseless provocation. The American's eyes turned to her with curiosity. They didn't understand the language of the conversation. Sophia hesitated for a moment. Her self-preservation instinct told her to smile politely and ignore the provocation, as she needed this job. But something about Ricardo's arrogant smile deeply bothered her. Actually, monsieur, Chateau Margaux is a premier Grand Cru from the Margaux appellation in the Bordeaux region, she replied in impeccable French, softly and confidently. It's an elegant wine with velvety tannins, but perhaps a bit heavy to accompany seafood on such a warm night. There was absolute silence. The Americans, though not understanding what was said, sensed the shift in atmosphere. Ricardo's smile froze. A mix of surprise and embarrassment flashed across his face. I was merely suggesting that for seafood on such a warm night, perhaps a Pouligny, Montrachet, or a Chablis Grand Cru would be equally exquisite and more suitable options, Sophia concluded in Portuguese, maintaining a respectful tone. Margaux is certainly an excellent choice for lovers of rich red wines, regardless of the occasion. Ricardo's eyes, previously condescending, now looked at her with a renewed intensity, a mixture of surprise, embarrassment, and something else that Sophia couldn't quite define. You speak French? He remarked, his voice losing some of its former arrogance. Yes, monsieur. I lived in Paris for 2 years, she replied simply. I'll be back in a few minutes with your appetizers. Excuse me. Sophia walked away from the table with confidence, feeling Ricardo's gaze burning into her back. Once in the kitchen, she allowed herself a slight smile of satisfaction. Rarely did she get to respond to client provocations, but this time it was particularly satisfying to disrupt the expectations of men like Ricardo Lemos. What was that? Julio asked, having observed the scene from a distance. Just a client who realized not to judge a book by its cover, Sophia replied, handing the order to the chef. She didn't know that her response in French had sparked something unexpected in Ricardo's mind. The entrepreneur, accustomed to controlling every situation, was intrigued by being surprised a rare feeling in his meticulously planned life. While the Americans enthusiastically discussed business, Ricardo looked more and more frequently towards the kitchen, awaiting the return of the waitress who spoke French like a native Parisian and who, for the first time in a long time, had made him feel like a complete idiot. The rest of the dinner passed with an almost palpable tension. Sophia served the dishes with her usual professional efficiency, but she felt Ricardo watching her every move. It wasn't the superficial gaze she was used to. Not just an appraisal of an attractive woman, it was something different, deeper, as if he were trying to solve a riddle. When she served the Dorado to the Americans, she noticed that Ricardo had barely touched his wineglass after the first sipe, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Perhaps a silent admission that his choice had not been the best. "Is everything to your liking?" Sophia asked, serving the last dish. "Excellent," the older American replied in simple English. "Very tasty, compliments to the chef." Sophia smiled back at the praise and was about to move away when Ricardo stopped her. "Actually," he said, shifting his gaze from her to the wine list, "I think we made a mistake with the wine choice. You mentioned Puligny Montrachet." Sophia maintained a professional expression despite her surprise. "Yes, sir, we have a Puligny Montrachet Premier Cru La Flave Folatiers 2015, an excellent white from Burgundy. May I bring a bottle?" His request sounded more like a question than an order. His tone had changed, becoming softer and more respectful compared to before. "That would certainly be an excellent choice to accompany the Dorado," he said. As Sophia went to retrieve the wine, she felt Julio's gaze on the back of her neck. The maitre d' hadn't said a word, but his questioning look spoke volumes. It was rare for someone to order a second expensive bottle of wine without finishing the first, and to change styles completely. "What did you tell him?" Julio quietly asked when they met at the bar. "I just suggested a wine that would pair better with the fish," and he listened. Sophia shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, as if it were a common occurrence. "Be careful," Julio warned. "Men like him aren't used to being contradicted." "I didn't contradict him." Sophia defended herself, taking the bottle the sommelier had just brought. "I just responded to a provocation with a little knowledge." When she returned to the table, the atmosphere had changed. The Americans looked more relaxed, laughing at some story Ricardo was telling. The entrepreneur interrupted his story when he saw her with the new bottle. "Gentlemen, you must get to know one of Brazil's hidden treasures," he said in English. "There's a small guest house in Fernando de Noronha where you feel like you're in paradise. Secluded, exclusive, only 5 suites." Sophia presented the bottle and began the wine service ritual. Ricardo took the opportunity to observe her more closely. How skillfully she handled the corkscrew, precisely tilted the bottle when pouring, exuding a calm confidence. "You mentioned you lived in Paris," he remarked when she offered him the first taste of wine. "Did you study culinary arts?" Sophia hesitated for a moment. Clients rarely asked personal questions, and answering them was even less common. But there was genuine interest in his gaze now, replacing the former arrogance. "My aunt is a chef in one of the restaurants there," she replied briefly. "I lived with her for 2 years." Ricardo tasted the white wine, and his eyes lit up with genuine approval. "Excellent," he announced, addressing the Americans. "Gentlemen, you have to try this, a real find." After he had served everyone, Sophia noticed that the atmosphere at the table had changed. Now the conversations were about gastronomy. Ricardo asked the Americans about their favorite restaurants in New York and San Francisco. It seemed the wine had changed not only the drink, but also the course of the evening. The rest of the dinner passed without incident. Sophia served the guests with her usual understated efficiency, offering exquisite desserts and special coffees. The Americans were clearly satisfied and were already talking about returning to the restaurant before leaving for the United States. When Sophia brought the bill, she noticed Ricardo waiting for her. The Americans had gone to the restroom, leaving him alone with her. He looked at her for a few seconds before speaking. "I would like to apologize for my inappropriate comment," he finally said, his voice softer and devoid of its former arrogance. "It was unnecessary, and, as it turned out, completely wrong," he added. Sophia didn't expect an apology. After many years working in restaurants, Sophia knew that few clients acknowledge when they cross boundaries. "No need to apologize, sir," she said. "It's part of the job." "No," he insisted. "You shouldn't have to apologize. Please, call me Ricardo." An awkward silence fell between them. Sophia was accustomed to clear boundaries between clients and staff, and something about this conversation was starting to blur them. "The wine was indeed a better choice," he continued, seemingly genuinely interested. "Did you study winemaking in Paris?" "Partially," Sophia replied, maintaining professionalism but allowing herself a more personal answer. "My aunt believes that food and wine are inseparable, It was impossible to live with her and not learn about it. Ricardo smiled differently than at the beginning of the evening, less calculating, more spontaneous. Your aunt must be a wise woman. Yes, Sophia confirmed, noticing the Americans returning. Excuse me, I need to attend to other tables. She quickly moved away, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There had been a change in Ricardo's behavior. The initial arrogance had given way to genuine interest, and this bothered her because she couldn't explain it. When the group finally left the restaurant, it was past midnight. Sophia watched from the window as they got into a luxurious car. Ricardo paused for a moment, looked back, as if searching for something or someone inside the restaurant. His gaze met hers through the glass, and he briefly waved before disappearing into the car. Impressive, Julio quietly commented, approaching unnoticed. He left a 30% tip on the bill. Sophia raised her eyebrows in surprise. That's unusual, just like a client changing their wine on a waitress's advice. The maitre d' smiled knowingly. What exactly happened at that table? He asked. Nothing special. Sophia evaded, beginning to collect the empty glasses. He was arrogant, I replied politely. He changed his mind and that's it. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. There was something unusual about that encounter, a tension that couldn't be resolved with a simple apology and generous tip. The rest of the night flew by quickly, busy with the routine of closing the restaurant. When Sophia finally finished her shift, the sky was already beginning to lighten on the horizon. She said goodbye to her colleagues and headed for the bus stop, feeling the weight of fatigue in her shoulders. The night bus was almost empty. Sitting by the window and watching the deserted streets of Rio, Sophia's mind drifted back to her encounter with Ricardo. There was something intriguing about him, not just his attractive appearance or obvious success, but the way his eyes had changed throughout the evening. It seemed that beneath the mask of the arrogant businessman lay a more complex and perhaps more interesting person. Nonsense, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. I'm romanticizing a difficult client who just behaved decently after being put in his place. Nothing more. When Sophia returned to the small apartment she shared with a classmate in Flamengo, she was too tired to think. She took off her uniform, had a quick shower, and fell asleep almost immediately. She dreamed of French vineyards, crystal glasses, and strangely brown eyes that looked at her with unsettling intensity. The following week passed as usual, classes in the morning, studying in the afternoon, and working at the restaurant in the evening. The encounter with Ricardo Lemos gradually faded from memory, becoming just another story about difficult clients, even if the ending had been unusual. It was the following Thursday, exactly 1 week after the incident, that the usual routine was disrupted. Sophia had just arrived at the restaurant and was in uniform when Julio appeared in the changing room with an intrigued expression. Guess who just booked a table for tonight? Something in his question made Sophia feel a chill in her stomach. No idea. Ricardo Lemos. A table for one. Sophia froze, tying her bow tie. For one? She repeated. No clients? No business meetings? Just him? Maybe he liked the food. She tried to sound nonchalant. Julio laughed, clearly unconvinced. No, he specifically asked for you to serve him. Sophia's heart unexpectedly skipped a beat. That's unusual. Unusual is an understatement. In 15 years, I've never seen Ricardo Lemos dine alone. He always comes with someone, or for business meetings. Sophia silently finished adjusting her uniform, trying to process the information. Why had Ricardo come alone, and why specifically for her? The most obvious explanation that he was romantically interested in her seemed so unbelievable that it almost made her laugh. Men like Ricardo Lemos weren't interested in waitresses who were gastronomy students. What time is the reservation? She finally asked. At 9:00 p.m., and I've already informed him that he's got the best table by the window. Sophia nodded, trying to ignore the slight tremor in her hands as she prepared herself. The idea of serving Ricardo again was daunting, not out of fear, but because of an undefined expectation she couldn't name. It's just another client, she told herself as she left the changing room. Nothing more. But the tingling in her stomach told a different story. As the hours slowly approached 9, Sophia repeatedly glanced at the door, half expecting, half dreading, Ricardo's arrival. She couldn't have predicted that this night would change the course of her life in ways she never could have imagined. Exactly at 9:00 p.m., as if on schedule, Ricardo Lemos entered Mar Elta. Sophia subtly observed him while serving another table. Unlike last week, he wasn't in a formal suit, but a light blue long-sleeved shirt, rolled up to his wrists, and dark, elegant trousers. Noticeably more casual, without the corporate armor, he looked younger and somehow more approachable. Julio greeted him with the reverence shown to important regular clients and escorted him to the window table with the best view of Ipanema's night sea. Sophia will be with you shortly, she heard Julio say, and felt a sudden warmth in her cheeks, realizing he was looking at her with a playful smile. Taking a deep breath to calm her inexplicable excitement, Sophia finished serving her table and approached Ricardo, who, casually flipping through the menu, seemed lost in thought. "Good evening, sir," she greeted, maintaining the professional tone she used with all clients. Ricardo looked up from the menu, and something in his gaze, a mix of recognition and satisfaction, made Sophia's stomach flutter. "Good evening, Sophia," he replied, and the use of her first name caught her off guard. She didn't remember mentioning it last week. "I hope I'm not inconveniencing you by asking for you specifically." There was an almost imperceptible hesitation in his voice, a stark contrast to the excessive confidence he had displayed during their first encounter. It seemed that at this moment, her opinion truly mattered to him. "Not at all," Sophia replied, regaining her composure. "May I offer you something to drink while you choose?" A brief smile lit Ricardo's face. "I think I'll trust your opinion this time. What would you recommend for a night like this?" Sophia was momentarily taken aback by the question. Clients rarely asked for her opinion so openly, especially someone like Ricardo Lemos. "It depends on what you're planning to order for dinner," she cautiously replied. "But to start, perhaps a Brazilian sparkling wine. We have an excellent Cavado Brut from Saragossa." "Perfect," Ricardo agreed immediately. "And for dinner, I'll take your recommendations too. What does the chef recommend today?" The fish of the day is fresh grouper, prepared with herbs from the restaurant's farm and served with manioc puree. It's one of Chef Renato's signature dishes. "Sounds excellent," Ricardo said. "I'll trust your recommendation." Sophia nodded, feeling a strange satisfaction at the trust he showed. "I'll be back shortly with your sparkling wine," she said, walking away and feeling his gaze follow her, but no longer with the former arrogant appraisal, just a genuine interest that was both unsettling and deeper than the initial condescension. On her way to the bar, Sophia met Julio's curious gaze, the maitre d', who raised his eyebrows in a questioning expression. She merely shook her head, indicating that everything was fine, although she herself felt far from normal. When she returned with the sparkling wine, Ricardo had put his phone away and was gazing thoughtfully out the window. The reflection of the restaurant lights on the glass created a superimposed image of Ricardo and the dark ocean in the background, as if he were suspended above the Atlantic. "Your sparkling wine, sir?" she interrupted his thoughts. Ricardo turned to her with a smile, more relaxed than ever before. "Thank you, and please, just call me Ricardo." "Sir makes me feel like my father." Sophia hesitated. There were unwritten rules of formality with clients, especially influential ones, but something about his request, devoid of any expectation of special privileges, made her agree. "As you wish, Ricardo," she replied, pouring the sparkling wine precisely, her signature style. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, observing the bubbles in the glass. 3 years, Sophia replied, allowing herself a small personal response. "I started working shortly after returning from Paris." "Why did you come back?" The question surprised her not by its curiosity, but by its perceptiveness, as if he sensed that there was a story behind her decision. "I have obligations here," she answered evasively. "Family, studies." Ricardo nodded, indicating he understood she had touched on something personal. "This sparkling wine is excellent." He changed the subject. "I never thought a Brazilian product could compete with French champagne." "We have excellent wineries in the south," Sophia replied. "Here, I feel more confident the climate and soil are similar to Europe's best wine regions." "You seem to know a lot about this," he remarked. "Enough to do my job well," she replied, realizing that other clients also needed her help. "I'll bring your dish shortly." In the kitchen, while waiting for the grouper to cook, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about the strange situation. Why was a man like Ricardo Lemos dining alone and specifically asking for her? The most obvious reason romantic interest seemed so unlikely as to be almost ridiculous, but there were no other reasonable explanations. "The VIP client is clearly interested in you," Chef Renata remarked, presenting the exquisitely arranged dish. "Julio said he specifically asked for you." "He probably just thought I knew the menu well." Sophia evaded, though she didn't believe it herself. "Of course," the chef chuckled, clearly skeptical. "I wear this hat because it's cold in the kitchen." Sophia rolled her eyes and took the dish. He's just a client, Renata, like all the others. If you say so, he smiled. But clients, like all the others, don't look at the kitchen door every 2 minutes as if waiting for someone specific. Those words made her pause for a moment. Was Ricardo truly interested in her? The idea seemed absurd. He was a rich and successful businessman. He could have any woman. Why would he be interested in a student waitress? When Sophia returned to the table, Ricardo was drinking the sparkling wine and looking out at the beach through the window. He immediately turned as he sensed her approach, as if eagerly awaiting her return. Fresh grouper with herbs from the farm and manioc puree, she announced, placing the dish in front of him. Would you like anything with this? A wine that would pair best? A dry white with a mineral note would be ideal, Sophia replied. We have a Chilean Chardonnay that pairs wonderfully with white fish. I trust you, he simply said. Walking away for the wine, Sophia couldn't help but notice how completely their dynamic had changed in a week. From initial arrogance to almost complete trust in her advice. It was both confusing and flattering. Returning with the wine, she found Ricardo enjoying his dish with a genuinely pleased expression on his face. This is amazing, he said as she poured the wine. Do you have a talent for recommendations? The chef, without a doubt, is talented. Sophia replied modestly, giving credit to the chef. But you understood exactly what I wanted, and this wine pairs perfectly with the fish, he insisted, tasting the wine. Sophia allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. She had studied harmonization extensively and was glad her knowledge was recognized, especially by someone who had initially underestimated her. May I ask a personal question? Ricardo suddenly asked, surprising her. Sophia hesitated. The line between professionalism and friendliness was thin, and she always tried not to cross it. But the respectful tone of the question made her soften. It depends on the question, she cautiously replied. Fair enough, he smiled. You said you're studying? What exactly? The question was harmless enough. Gastronomy. I'm in my 3rd year. Ricardo's eyes lit up with genuine interest. So this isn't just a job for you, it's a passion? Yes, Sophia admitted, feeling strangely vulnerable opening up this part of herself. Since childhood, I dreamed of becoming a chef. I grew up watching my aunt cook and dreamed of one day having my own restaurant. And you'll achieve it? He said confidently, which surprised her. It wasn't an empty phrase or a casual compliment, there was genuine conviction in his words. How can you be so sure? You barely know me. Ricardo took a sip of wine, not taking his eyes off her. I recognize determination when I see it, and determined people usually get what they want. His voice held a mix of admiration and something else Sophia couldn't quite define, and it made her feel a warmth rising in her neck. I need to attend to other tables, Sophia suddenly said, realizing how long they had been talking. I'll be back to see if you need anything else. For the rest of the dinner, Sophia divided her attention between other clients and periodically approached Ricardo's table. With each return, he seemed more relaxed and inclined to talk, as if gradually shedding the mask of the successful businessman to reveal the person behind the title. Sophia learned that he was 36, had founded his first company at 24, and his passion for hotels had begun during a trip to Europe as a teenager. Small fragments of information gradually formed a more complex portrait of a man she had initially considered just another arrogant executive. When she brought the bill almost 2 hours later, Sophia felt a strange reluctance, as if she didn't want the evening to end. Ricardo seemed to share this feeling, delaying payment longer than necessary. Dinner was perfect, he commented, signing the bill. Exactly what I needed after a tough week. Glad you enjoyed it, Sophia replied, maintaining a professional tone despite an inexplicable hint of disappointment at the approaching end of the evening. Ricardo looked at her for a long time, as if making an important decision. Finally, with an almost imperceptible movement, he took a business card from his pocket and placed it on the table. I know this might seem inappropriate, and please feel free to decline, he began, his voice losing its usual confidence, but I would like to invite you to dinner. Not here, of course, and not as a waitress and client, but simply as two people who perhaps have more in common than it seems at first glance. Sophia stared at the card as if it were an alien object. The offer was so unexpected and outside the bounds of her everyday world that she didn't know how to react for a moment. She hesitated, aware of Julio's watchful gaze from across the room. It will be difficult, Ricardo added, smiling understandingly. I really understand. That's why I said you can decline, but I thought it was worth asking. Sophia took the card, still unsure what to say. I'll think about it, she replied. That's all I ask, he said, standing up. Thank you for this extraordinary evening, Sophia, regardless of your decision. Watching him head for the exit, Sophia felt torn between the sense of professionalism that had always guided her life and a growing curiosity about the man who, in 2 nights, had shattered all her expectations. The card lay heavy in her pocket, as if made of lead rather than paper, and for the first time in a long time, Sophia wasn't sure what her next step would be. Aren't you going to call him? Sophia asked Daniela, her roommate and classmate, who was looking at Ricardo's business card as if it were a venomous snake. 3 days had passed since then, and the card was still lying on the small kitchen table, sometimes ignored, sometimes carefully examined. I didn't say I would call, Sophia replied, stirring her coffee involuntarily. I'm considering my options. Daniela sighed with annoyance. What options? He's a client of the restaurant where you work. That's practically a guide on how to complicate your life. I know, Sophia agreed, although a part of her was still curious. But he seemed different, not like other rich and arrogant men. Daniela skeptically raised an eyebrow. These stories always end the same way, believe me. Sophia knew her friend was right. In her 3 years at Mar Alta, she had seen many waitresses receive invitations from wealthy clients. Rarely did such stories end well usually. They were just temporary amusements for men tired of their privileged lives. You're right, Sophia finally agreed, putting the card in a drawer. It's better to keep everything professional. Daniela smiled with satisfaction. Good. Now, help me prepare for the knife skills exam. I'm completely confused by the French terms. Sophia nodded, grateful for the distraction, and spent the rest of the morning diligently studying with Daniela, determined to focus on what was truly important. Her education, her future as a chef, and dreams that had nothing to do with millionaires, no matter how intriguing they might be. In the evening, during her shift at Mar Alta, Sophia couldn't help but glance at the door, half expecting, half dreading Ricardo's reappearance. But he didn't come. The whole week passed without word from him. Sophia wavered between relief and a strange sense of disappointment she refused to acknowledge. On Friday, almost a week after the invitation, Sophia arrived at the restaurant early to help prepare for a special event. A private dinner for 20 people celebrating the anniversary of an important gastronomy magazine. She was in the kitchen, learning from Chef Renato how to decorate a special French dessert, when Julio appeared with an intrigued expression. Sophia, someone's asking for you at the reception. She looked up in surprise. Me? Who? A woman says she's your aunt. Sophia froze, holding the dessert spoon in the air. My aunt? Yes, Elisa, if I'm not mistaken. Sophia almost dropped the spoon, carefully placed it on the counter, and took off her apron. Her heart pounded faster. I'll be right back, Renato, she said quickly and headed for the reception. Thousands of questions swelled in her mind. Aunt Elisa, who had lived in Paris for almost 10 years, hadn't mentioned a visit to Brazil in their last video calls. What could have brought her here so suddenly? Seeing her aunt, an elegant woman in her 50s with short gray hair and impeccable posture that revealed years of experience in professional kitchens, Sophia smiled despite her confusion. Aunt Eliza, she exclaimed, hugging her tightly. What are you doing here? Why didn't you say you were coming? Elisa replied with equal enthusiasm. It was a spontaneous decision, dear. I was invited to be a judge at a gastronomy festival here in Rio. I couldn't refuse. That's wonderful, Sophia smiled genuinely. How long have you been here? Where are you staying? Arrived last night. Staying at the Arpodor Hotel, Elisa replied. And then, with a playful smile, she added, a very nice place, and the owner personally made sure I had the best suite. Sophia frowned in surprise. The owner? Yes, a young man named Ricardo Lemos, her aunt said. The shock must have been evident on Sophia's face because her aunt laughed. You seem to know him, Elisa remarked, studying her niece intently. He mentioned a talented waitress who speaks excellent French and who, it turns out, is my niece. I became curious how you met. Sophia felt her face flush hot. He's a client of the restaurant. A client? Elisa confirmed, raising an eyebrow, skeptically disbelieving the simplicity of the explanation. But he was very impressed with you. So much so that when I said I was coming to Rio, he insisted on arranging my accommodation and invited me to a special event at his hotel tomorrow night. What event? Sophia asked, feeling a mix of emotions. An exclusive tasting of Brazilian wines. It seems he's launching a new wine list in his hotels, focused exclusively on national brands. Elisa paused, carefully observing her niece's reaction. And he said he'd be delighted if you came too. Sophia blinked in surprise. Me? Why? According to him, You have exceptional taste and impressive knowledge of wines. Elisa smiled, amused by Sophia's confusion. I must say, I was quite intrigued. It's not every day one of Brazil's most successful businessmen praises my niece so enthusiastically. Sophia didn't know what to say. The thought that Ricardo had not only met her aunt, but had also arranged her accommodation and invited her to an event, all seemingly to create an opportunity to see her again, was puzzling. I don't know if that would be appropriate, Sophia finally replied. He's a client of this place. My dear, Elisa gently interrupted her. When I first went to Paris, I also had 1,000 reasons not to seize opportunities that seemed out of reach. If I'd listened to all those reasons, I would still be teaching basic cooking in some community center in Brazil. Sophia bit her lip, hesitating. This is different, Aunt. I don't want him to think I'm interested in his money or position. And who said you are? Elisa smiled. You might just be interested in an exclusive tasting of Brazilian wines, a chance for professional growth. There was wisdom in her aunt's words, and Sophia began to reconsider her decision to keep her distance. After all, it wasn't a personal opportunity, but a professional one, exactly the kind of experience that could enrich her education. The event is by invitation only, Elisa continued, noticing Sophia's dwindling doubt. Sommeliers, critics, renowned chefs, people you usually only meet years after graduation. This was a compelling argument.